Hey, welcome to the podcast, Logan.
Hey, thanks, Asher.
To introduce you to the audience, I'd like to ask you, who do you say you are?
Who do I say I am? I say I'm a father and a husband primarily. Um, uh, as far as professionally, I think I would probably call myself like I'm an entrepreneur. Got a counseling practice. I'm trained formally as a professional therapist, as a marriage and family therapist, more specifically. Um, and started a counseling practice, have some other folks that work with me at a practice in Charlotte, and also gotten involved in some commercial real estate stuff in some areas of town, just growing up in another city where that was happening a lot, and
Yeah.
tried to be smart and leverage a bit um, to have that happening. And then I've also gotten really active on social media, I guess, in the last few years. So that some people might say I'm an influencer, but I kind of generally call myself a socially conscious entrepreneur.
I like that. And you were just telling me a little bit about how you became how you got into your career. Do you mind kind of going into that? I was going to
Sure.
ask you, like, yeah, how did you get into what you're doing now?
So it's interesting. It was how I got into what I fell in love with the counseling psychology framework as something that I thought that I could find meaning in doing. I was really intellectually stimulated by and had a lot of formal training in and kind of sharpened it as a craft along the way. But
Mhm.
I discovered that I really loved it after undergraduate school. Um, I was going to school at the University of Georgia and
Mm.
had in Athens, Georgia. And for any of y'all out there who are familiar with Athens, Georgia and University of Georgia, probably for the last two, maybe 3 decades, it's like top 10, maybe five party schools, period. It's a huge party, music, rock and roll environment. I was really into all of it, too into it. And got wrapped up in some addiction stuff, alcoholism stuff early on in my young adulthood.
Mhm.
And when I was finishing undergrad, it was right during the recession, like end of 2006. And so I decided, this is a good time to just do something really different. And I went to apply to a wilderness therapy program. I was really looking for a structured, primarily, I was looking for a structured environment for myself to get sober, where I knew that I would not have regular access to what I was finding escapism in, and I knew wasn't going well. Saw some other of my peers go off the deep end. I was like, you know what, I need a bit of structure right now, and it was a good place to be for that. And got sober, did some of my own psychotherapy, really fell in love with the work that I was doing, and losing myself in service to others and kind of finding myself in the process. Ended up enjoying it so much. Went to go get graduate studies were focused on that. But it's interesting, the average lifespan people that took that job probably 2 to 3 months. We had a lot of people that would come in for 1 week or 2 weeks and just be like, deuces, I'm out. It was really hard to keep staffed. It's a super intense environment.
Mm.
Um, and so staying for 3 years was odd. There's some other people who not I'm kind of
Yeah.
odd, who's not.
Right. Right.
Um, there met other similarly uh, pro-social and functionally odd folks who were doing that work for the right reasons as well, and still really good friends with a lot of them today now, 20 years later.
Yeah. What is wilderness? What was the word?
It was a wilderness therapy, counseling and education
Right.
setting. So in the Appalachian Mountains, in the foothills around Low Gap, Fancy Gap, North Carolina, like right on the border between North Carolina and Virginia,
Okay. Okay.
and no electricity, living out there, a group of 10 boys ages 11 to 17 that are
Um,
coming down from youth detention centers or psychiatric residential treatment facilities, who are behaviorally, emotionally, and socially still having a hard time, don't necessarily meet the criteria for still being where they're at with intensity. Or sometimes in a juvenile detention system, like, hey, we know you're a good kid and you just got caught up. Here's a shot to not be in YDC, which
mm,
for those of y'all who don't know, is basically youth jail. It's kind of where they sit you away from the rest of the juveniles,
gotcha.
until you're ready for jail time as an adult, which
Mm,
unfortunately in this country, they'll start moving you in that direction, depending on how physically big you are or how much melanin you have in your skin, statistically speaking. 16, way too early
yeah.
to be around that population. So it was really cool being able to work with a lot of these kids, giving them a shot to do something really different, as well as stepping down from that level of structure and acuity, and
Yeah.
having a chance to socialize and develop different coping skills and get caught up in school before they go back into their natural settings with their families or in foster homes or whatever's happening.
Gotcha. I guess I was curious about it because I the closest thing I've ever heard to something like that would be Boy Scouts or something that's like outdoors, nature, or it's like, okay, I guess can you explain like what how you found it and kind of like what the philosophy behind the wilderness
Sure.
therapy is, like kind of being out away from away from, I guess, everyday hustle and bustle and kind of just being really disconnected off the grid, so to speak.
Yeah, the philosophy is really based in experiential education.
Mm,
Um, so being able to live pro-socially in a group, using a lot of group consequences, also have different, programmatic structure way of doing things to make sure it doesn't get too frustrating that anyone, blows their lid, so to speak. Um, Using a lot of experiential education, reality therapy, natural logical consequences. I would be living in group
mhm.
with a group of boys, supposed to be 5 days on, 2 days off, realistically, because it was so difficult to keep staff. It was that would be all kinds of different ratios.
Yeah.
And yeah, living out, I had a water pump, but no electricity in the wintertime, chopping wood to fuel the wood stoves, and
Oh,
having
wow.
rotations for building semi-permanent structures with hand tools, and like cutting trees down and stripping the bark and bleaching them and leaving them out to sun, and practice chopping them in rounds and doing a lot of the math, figuring out blueprints for what these structures are going to look like, and covering a lot of like arithmetic and all kinds of different stuff, and as a group. And you really see kids kind of unfold in a much more natural habitat, both socially, where they're allowed to function at a developmentally appropriate level and feel safe and finally have the level of influence that a teenager needs to have in their day-to-day life.
Yeah.
However, in a completely different setting that's highly structured, where they're also surrounded by nature and have me there facilitating a safe and honest group process. um, and it would go anywhere from you know losing time feeling like Huckleberry Finn in the wood when you have a really high functioning group,
Yeah.
down to I might as well have been a corrections officer, chunks of time, for several months, like depending on what's happening in the group or where you get placed, what your tool is. But yeah.
Gotcha. Man, that's amazing. And I'm curious, like, what is something you gained from the experience going there yourself initially? And
Mhm.
like, what's a reason that you chose to stay and become like a leader to be able to help young men?
Yeah. So the reason I went initially was because I was kind of out of control in my own life. Knew that it was the on a like I had a careers in psychology course at University
Mhm.
in Georgia. One
Yeah.
The only time a dude came with flip flops on was the representative of this company, and I was like, that sounds cool. I like hiking. And I don't mind those teenagers. A lot of the people that I ran with got shipped off to brat camps in Utah, and
Mhm.
it kind of sounds similar, I guess. Like whatever. Like I can speak their speak,
Mhm.
and just kind of jumped on it. And also, uh, yeah, at that point, I knew it was something that needed to happen. That just ticked a lot of boxes as far as could save money, work, get be in a very structured setting, be doing work that I wanted to be doing, and figure out what else I ever needed to figure out along the way. It was not a very sexy option per se. Like a
Yeah.
lot of the people I grew up with were just like, "What are you doing?" Okay, I was dating this woman at the time, um, who was like, "Hey, I think it's really great what you're doing, but I'm never gonna see you." And like, what the? I just like I don't get it. So I mean, like, bye, kind of thing. I'm like, okay. Um, but what kept me there
Mhm.
was falling in love with working with those kids, man. Um, I remember the first group that I was in was that I got placed in because through the training they were just that identified me as someone who was really steady and persistent and structured, um, and but also as someone that was prone to like getting pissed off and
Yeah.
redirecting and losing my cool. So they went ahead and placed me in a very difficult group that had trouble with structure, being like, hey, he'll either learn to figure out into his strengths or he'll go ahead and be a jerk and quit. Um, and one or two times I realized I acted like a jerk and learned from it and course corrected it and incorporated my own psychotherapy and figured out whatever that was. But I ended up working with this group that was very difficult. Ended up finding some rhythms and they became higher functioning, and we ended up getting some rewards at some point as a group for most improved group on the mountain at some point. And we were all proud of ourselves. I was a rookie counselor too, so I was all like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about it, thinking it was more about me than about what this group was doing at the time anyway. Like, I had some reinforcement to do. And we got to sleep inside one night as a part of our reward. And I did not bring a pillow or anything like support my head. I was like, oh, I'm just going to use my hooded sweatshirt like I always did on river trips or whatever. But on river
Mhm.
trips, you're kind of like your body leans into like the ground. It was like we were sleeping on linoleum floor, and I was having a really hard time figuring this out. And at one point, I was like jostled awake by this movement under my head and shoulder. And, just kind of instinctually, I was kind of like gave one of these and looked over because I was sleeping in group with 10 boys that had like access right out. So I don't know, like, and it was one of these kids that was scooting his pillow under my head.
Uh,
I was like, damn, all right, I'm here. Um, so did that work for a while. And then, excuse me.
no, take your time.
Um, I decided to focus on it in grad school from a family therapy and family systems lens,
Mhm.
when started seeing sibling groups come through. I would spend all this time for 10 or 11 months working with a kid specifically and be like, all right, like we're going back, like you got it. And then their younger brother, 3 years younger, comes in. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, where y'all coming from? Like,
Yeah.
I'll take it wherever I can run into you. And, but there's obviously a bridge that's effed somewhere, and we need to
Mhm.
get to that. And for me, that was understanding the meta and systems nature of how human beings are healthy or unhealthy together. Even
Mhm.
if that's a small a dynamic as two people or a large dynamic as a community, which is generally understood as a concept called systems theory,
Mhm.
which comes from 1950s models and like cybernetics and mechanical engineering, and then was picked up very quickly by family systems theory, what became known as family therapy. So went to go
Gotcha.
study with the most old school program that I could find with the Foundation of Liberatory Psychology in Portland, Oregon, and went out there for about 3 years, studied, had a really good time socially, really fit in, hated the weather. Uh, and there was, and as much as it socially fit in, it was also like all these super progressive thinking, for the most part, white people that had a really, like cool and critical way of looking at things that I really dug, but also it was so whitewashed that there was very little space for practical application. And sometimes there wasn't enough functionality in what was happening. And I was also just like, okay, cool, but like, where's the rest of the people at?
Right.
And all like in the sun. So back down south we came.
It's like it's like I guess you'd say you went to somewhere that was more theory based, where you were coming from somewhere that was more practical.
Totally, totally.
I
I
get that.
remember being in an airport 2 years into being in Portland and hitting Miami at one point and stepping out and hearing all the different accents and languages at one point, and like,
Mm.
um, so, also growing up in Atlanta, um, we lived in this neighborhood, Little Five Points, that now it's super gentrified and bougie. Then it was the funky community
Mhm.
where mixed race couples, LGBT couples, folks who were kind of had different intersections of oppression insofar as their social location were all living together. And it
Mhm.
was like an artist community as well. There's all this kind of like diversity, funkified stuff going on.
Mhm.
And that's what I grew comfortable with, meaning like I was in an area socially or culturally that could hold a lot of different viewpoints.
Mhm.
Like I was as a little Jewish kid growing up in the South. So yeah.
Got you, man. And I guess maybe I didn't ask you before. Like, how did your family end up like in the South?
Mhm. Um, so my intergenerationally speaking,
Well, I mean, like
or
you.
my current family.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Yes, intergenerational. Like I guess
Gotcha.
your parents are like their parents.
Yeah. So on my dad's side, they settled in the Baltimore area,
Mhm.
and they're primarily Russian Jews
Mhm.
that, um, gosh, came over pre World War II, post World War I.
Mhm.
And then on my mom's side, they settled in Atlanta, where there's also a large, generally you're going to find large Jewish populations in the States, probably internationally. If not in outside of Israel, they're going to be in large urban areas. In the Atlanta area, probably pre World War One. And then I had my biological grandfather died relatively early. And I had my grandmother remarried a fella when I was a little guy,
Mhm.
who immigrated in uh, whenever it was shipped back over from he was in his Auschwitz concentration camp survivor.
Gotcha.
And he was rescued by a fellow named Oscar Schindler. There's the famous movie called Schindler's List. It's one of
Mhm.
the 1,200 stupid, dumb, lucky Jewish folks who was rescued by this German national who owned a factory and protected a large number of Jewish folks. And yeah, he had spent a lot of time with him growing up. Lived in the same neighborhood as him and
Mhm.
had some funky dynamics going on in my household. Spent a lot of time with him. And but yeah,
Gotcha.
that's where my people came from.
I guess maybe I feel like maybe I asked you the wrong question, but I think you answered it in the way that your mom's family settled in the Atlanta area and your dad's family was up in the Baltimore area and they somehow met and decided to settle in the Atlanta area.
Yeah, yeah. My dad ended up going. He went to University of Oregon from Baltimore to get a degree, and then he came back down to Atlanta to work.
Gotcha.
My folks met in Atlanta. My dad was, and they got a house in Little Five Points.
Mhm.
Um, and my dad was going to graduate school at Georgia State and working as a TA and selling computers door to door. And until I had enough money to buy a laundromat in what was, I think, maybe still called Cabbage Town, and has also been way gentrified.
Mhm.
Um, I remember sitting at a table and like counting quarters as my first like money, counting 40 quarters at a time. Like, the dollar, penny saved, penny earned. And be like, you know, rolling them to mom, and very like ethnic thing, I feel like, in the States. And my mom was a artisan, a craftsperson. She's a ceramics, a potter for
Gotcha.
a while until she health stuff fell apart more and more.
Yeah. It's cool to see how like kind of where we end up from just where people come from, and it's like your dad going from like Baltimore to Oregon back to Atlanta, and then you getting a chance to be like in Georgia, go to Athens to Portland to Miami back to Georgia, now North Carolina. It's like that's really cool just seeing like what where you travel and kind of like what happens in between, just not only the length of time but also just the experiences we have.
A huge proponent of traveling. Um, I think the Aussies and the Australian community, what's
Mhm.
more the Aboriginal community, I think, calls it going on walkabout as a coming of age ritual. It's supposed to just like go get lost and make your way back. Uh, and while that very much makes sense for people who are, you know, like so dialed into magnetic fields that they don't need compasses, it's a very important coming of age ritual. I still think humans need to go get lost and
Yeah.
be immersed in different social expectations and cultures and be forced to meet new people. And it teaches you to trust your own wings, to bet on your own rhythms, to advocate for yourself, as well as it's a way to consensually be forced out of ego
Mm.
through traveling. Um,
Yeah.
you have to learn to stay, you know, much more non-attached to whatever your expectations are.
Mm.
And that's easier to do when you know that it's coming from a place of your own decision making,
Yeah.
versus being, you know, challenged by the chaos of the cosmos and your own comfort zone, where you're like prone to getting a little bit more, you know, reactive about it, taking things personally that really have nothing to do with us. But it's easier
Gotcha.
to move like water, as Bruce Lee would say, traveling.
I like that because when you brought up the wilderness therapy and just having boys for that matter have like how would you say participate in a similar experience where it's that they're being put in a natural environment and essentially given things to do to help them kind of come into themselves and really bond with people that are similar to their age, but also kind of take away the pressures of the world of just being like, okay, you have to do this, you have to um, watch what everybody's doing online. Okay, you're not measuring up to this, you're not measuring up to that. So it's like seeing you bring up that example. It's very eye opening, and that's why I was curious to know, like, from you going in initially to get help for yourself, like, what was it like um, when you were called upon to be helping other like younger people and just like be responsible for them now, because I'm guessing like were you voluntold like, okay, hey, we know you're here for help but we need you to do this.
Oh, I didn't disclose that I was there for help. I
Mm,
didn't. Mm.
Gotcha.
I was just like, I know I won't have DTs. I just
Hmm.
need to be away from booze
Gotcha.
and some other stuff that perpetuated it all. Um, where did I, really, if I, it was living in those spaces and, being, getting healthy, functioning at a developmentally appropriate level for myself,
Yeah.
the young man, while using my gifts, talents, resources that I had available to me. And in some ways, discovering them through the trials and tribulations of the journeys that took with these boys,
Hmm.
uh, realized that there was something so much bigger that wanted to bet on and be a part of. Um, and yeah, yeah, it was, I mean, for what I've learned, how how to think about people are happy and healthy. We are fundamentally collective creatures, and we forget about this in our individualist culture. I think Carl Jung called it this like collective unconscious that we all kind of share together as human beings. And when you get uh, when you're able to tap into source, abundance, whatever that is for you as a human being on a personal level, and channel all the energy and everything that's available to you to find meaning through your own like blood, sweat, and tears day to day and be appreciated for it.
Mm.
Oh man, once you find that, that's what makes human beings tick. This is what brought us out of the trees and into the grasslands. We were, hooting at each other with animated, emotion-filled, uh, pre-verbal stuff and sharpened sticks, and would make plans on dirt and started killing apex predators. Well, one-on-one, a chimpanzees rip our appendages off of our torso.
Mm.
That was a huge leap by being collective.
Yeah.
And by knowing that each thing that we're doing each moment fits into a group and that we're valued and appreciated for who we are and being there in that moment with our tribe. It takes a village to do anything worthwhile, not just raise a child. That's what that proverb is.
Man. I think what's so cool about that is that although you went to get help or to put yourself in a better position,
Mhm.
you had the wherewithal to go be a part of a community, or at least be in a place where you could help others. And knowing that some way, or maybe not even knowing that that was going to help you in return, like just
Yeah.
that correlation seems like it's worked. Maybe I would ask if it's worked out in a healthy way instead of assuming, because it's on the one hand, I was just speaking with a friend of mine where we come from a Christian background or a church background where there's this notion that it's better to give than to receive, but sometimes that same thought process can be misused or misleading, where you you lose a sense of your personal value, and you always think it's better to give than to receive. So in order for me to be validated or for me to be acknowledged, I
Mhm.
need to give everything of myself. And then when I'm completely empty and I'm sitting here wondering what's wrong with me, it's that it's not really something's wrong with you, it's just you kind
Don't
of
have your cup back.
overcorrected.
You're
It's
giving too much. Yeah.
right, you're giving too much, and it's
Yeah.
okay that sometimes if you don't have something to give, you cannot give it.
No, you can't. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the scripture is talking about empowering people and functioning through grace and being of service. But our fruit can only be as good as the roots, and we can only empower other people if we're in a position to help them leverage. If we're not leveraged, it's false. It's actually a codependent enabling type thing,
Yeah.
which is um, not about empowering at all. That totally changes it, right? I mean, you're right. A lot of times people use some of these words as rhetoric to control thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of others, unfortunately. Um, where did so the question being like how it really went back and forth. If I'm going to go back, there were times sitting out there where I was going like, this sucks. Why am I doing this? This is awful. I can like been in this problem, these kids who want to kill each other and sometimes even kill me, planning how to kill me.
It's a scary thought.
And like feel all this like sweat dripping down my body. Haven't showered in 5 or 6 days. I have a degree. Like, what am I doing? And there's I went through all that, and the other thing, interestingly enough, growing up and having some funky dynamics in my own childhood and being the oldest, there's always a part of me that can really get down with looking out for other people that seem to be marginalized in some way. So it was, and I hadn't had access to that part of me in a while because I was too busy getting drunk and running around being stupid adolescent. And once started recognizing that this was a part of me and something that I was good at and could help people put together, and actually like had kind of a knack for, intellectually speaking, I was like, hey, like I went to college and took my fair share of classes that I was bored out of my effing skull. I don't get engaged in what's happening very easily. I'm super engaged in what's happening here. And I work really hard and am really impactful, it appears. I think I can make a good living doing this, and really love what I'm doing. When I was a little boy, when I said, hey, what do you want to be when you grew up? Just like everyone else, I was like, I'm gonna be a firefighter, policeman, or I'm gonna be the president, like whatever, like high power, high influence jobs thinking. But that's not it's not what I'm here to do.
What's funny about that, it's almost like, in a way, not to draw like a huge parallel that may not be there, but like firefighter, policeman, president, they all, if they're seen in, I think there's a sense that they're seen in a way of people of service, people of not just powerful, but also people of community. Like firemen, it's like that's someone that I can count on to, if I have a problem. Hey, the president is someone that's like, okay, this is someone that I trust, that's leading us. That, okay, sometimes they're not good. There's bad. There's not so good. There's like almost everything in between. But it's like, I I like that through the experience that you went through therapy in the wilderness, you also came to have the platform or develop the platform that you have now called the balanced man. And I was like, that's so powerful. And it's something that seems like it's been more and more needed through things like the pandemic and through things just like with people like being able to put something else online, because we can always talk about the negative, but just seeing like a surge of people just seeing this isn't out there, but I'm going to utilize my life or utilize my experience and help other men and really let people know that it's okay. Like what you're feeling, it's not bad. You don't have to always like suck everything up and just push it down. It's like, no, it's okay to be emotional. Like when you told the story about the little kid that was seeing you struggling and he's trying to push the cot or the pillow underneath your head to help you. It's
Yeah.
like just to have the interaction where it's like you've been helping them and now he sees that, oh, it's like, hey, let me help this guy out. It's
Mhm.
That's a beautiful thing. And that almost choked me up too, because I was like, it's okay to be choked up because that's something that's valuable.
Human.
And it's it's good to know that you can give, but you can also receive. And just being able to allow yourself to have both, it helps you operate in a world where there's an and mentality. Like two things can be true at the same time. It's not always this or that. And it's nice to have like alternatives. It doesn't always have to be we're running with this. Like, yes, it's good to be in a tribe and a community and you want to do things that are good for the community. But back to the example of like landing in Miami and having that diversity of just thought, language, expression, feeling, it's like there's something beautiful in the struggle and the pain that kind of comes through that. Because when you um, wash things away, so to speak, I know people say whitewash, but I'm just using the term wash. When things are kind of theorized so much so to where the practicality doesn't come into play, a lot
Yeah.
of things kind of get lost in translation. And it's like, it's not a bad idea, but maybe we should try it. Or even before we try it, let's not just poke holes in it, but like, let's not be so arrogant to think that we have all the answers that everybody ever needed. Like people have
Make
been
sure
at,
it's functional and there's
right, right.
egalitarian checks and balances.
Right, right. It's like there's been so many things that's happened over the course of history, and it's strange how what's the term that they say? It's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And
Sure.
that's such a strange thing, because it's like you would never think that you could do something bad with the right mindset, so to speak. You're like, oh, like I'm well meaning. I would never do that. And like, to go back to the example of the things that happened in the, I guess you'd say, the mid 20th century with Germany, and a lot of people point to that as like, this is horrible, it should never happen again. But to the gentleman that you mentioned, I've heard that name a lot, and it's working to make time to read things like the Gulag and different things like that, to really see like, these are things that not only other people did, but these are things that I'm capable of. And until
Absolutely.
I'm willing to admit that, I'll always see other people as just another, like, okay, that's my enemy. It's like, no, that's kind of you. It's like everything that they're
I
doing
like
is
how I like how
you.
you're talking about like the more the more we can encounter each other
Mhm,
in our humanity, which involves fundamentally vulnerability, the stronger and more resilient we are, more
mhm.
intelligent, all of it.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a very very funky time that we're running into these days with all these isolated farming communities running into each other that and made possible to connect through information technology, and everybody's spooked by each other again and having to refigure out how to do this in a way that's actually practical, because apparently the civil rights movement was a lot of concepts that were not put into practice as well. And I go back to some of that, or a lot of that.
Mhm,
And I mean, what you're talking about here, I think, is a huge misconception that happens in especially American culture a lot. Like, the more giving I'm going to be, the the weak, being kind is a weakness.
mhm,
Well, if any value you think about being that's giving, if there's not reciprocation for you, it's not actually a value. It's a way that it's some kind of spiritual bypass ego trip. Like, I don't know exactly what kind, but it's telling yourself that you have control of the situation and things are going to be okay because you're over functioning for other people. Man, it's all about you, not about them either. And it's not actually helping them. So the concept of teaching people how to fish, not giving them fish, the way that we develop boundaries with ourselves and with each other, we should always be thinking about our personal integrity and the meaning, like the core values that help us be as graceful and resourceful as possible.
Yeah.
And mine, like by the place where I am always working here at my workstation at home, my office. And talking about Oscar Schindler, whatever decisions that I'm making kind of in a similar way. I didn't realize that my grandfather was on Schindler's List until after he died. It was not something that wasn't the part that he talked about. He had a lot of survivor's guilt about it. I knew that only he and his brother survived of like 6 other siblings and his parents. I didn't know how that happened. I didn't ask specifics. I knew that you don't ask specifics. You're just kind of grateful for whatever stories trickle out when you're not putting pressure on people with their trauma. We use a professional a lot as well. But after his funeral in my early 20s, learned that he was one of the folks on Schindler's List. And it was part of that understanding. I remember a teenager being like, what the, are you serious? Like, Schindler, this has been, I mean, a movie hadn't come out too long ago, and I was trying to wrap my mind around it. And I was like, okay, so I need to be if I'm going to empower people, I need to be a business person too. And I always have to be able to leverage these things off of each other. And we're also functioning in a civilization that's inherently capitalist. It's capitalist before it even worries about human rights. And it just kind of is what it is. We are an economic system primarily. So if you can't leverage yourself economically to some degree, the correlation with how much you can help people is leveraged in how much you can help other people leverage resources and how much you're leveraged and kind of all above. So with all the decisions that I make and stuff that I've gotten involved in, it's all come from the framework of, okay, how can I empower people in this space or doing things a bit differently? Even the commercial real estate stuff, found this like small office complex in an area that I knew was going to go to boomtown in a few years, and was, the rent was going to balloon. And the pro forma that I wrote for the bank, and talk about all the competing areas and how I'm going to use this to be like a natural healing enclave with only natural healer healthcare people right down the street from the rest of the hospital stuff going on. It's a perfect location for it, and be able to offer rent rates that are within the realm of what natural healer folks can afford, when we're surrounded by lawyer rates and high power accountant rates. And it's it all has to be taken into consideration. Everything is everything. We have all these competing needs and things that have to work together. Abundance is not about being greedy. Abundance is about how you encounter other people and encounter communities and help people leverage resources and leverage your own to maximize that moving forward. That's the opposite of greedy. And then that always ends up coming back either in your reputation or the people that want to do business with you down the line, or whatever that happens to be. It's usually not short-term obvious, but it always comes back again, as long as you have enough boundaries for how you're functioning with folks.
I like what you said there, and it reminded me of something I heard recently where someone said it's good for good people with money to help other people, because then it kind of creates that balance, and it speaks to things like integrity and really being about what you believe in. And like, for instance, I think when people talk about capitalism, it always people always equate it with greed, but it's, I think too many times we don't look too much at the, what is it? You'd say the supply and demand versus like the humans that are within, because it's like humans are going to do human things, and just one, it it does, I guess a lot of times it always takes one bad actor to just kind of make something corrupt, or it makes it to where everyone's like, oh no, that's not going to work anymore. But like having the wherewithal to know, hey, this is how this environment operates, and if I want to be able to have impact on it, I can be a good businessman. I don't have to be like that. Like, okay, everyone can look at what what they're going to get up front, whether it's people are looking at markets and being like, okay, yeah, I got my money, or I'm going to use this
Oh,
person up until I get what I want from them. It's like it
calling it just
takes,
business, too.
what's that?
Calling it just business.
Right, right. But it's interesting when it's the people that say that, and you wonder, it's like, okay, how does that person sleep at night? And depending on who you're talking to, somebody can tell you to your face one thing, but then when they go home, only they know what it is that they have to contend with. And the thing that's interesting is that no matter what someone shows you on the outside, there's always a reflection in their actions of what's going on internally. And it's it's something that I'm learning not to really question people about. Like, it's it's becoming interesting just to observe what goes around, or what goes on in my environment, and just be aware that it's not up to me to necessarily control what other people's outcomes are. And
Mhm.
then when I feel the need to um question what they're doing, the question always comes back to me is like, well, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you why aren't you doing something opposite of that? Why aren't you creating something that can help you, that can help bring the opposite of that? It's like, if they're human just like you, and they have the ability to speak words and to make plans and to um work at something, whether they're going about it right or wrong, it's like you also have the ability to do those things. And what's interesting, it's like, on the one hand, you could look at, or I'll speak about myself, not to put anybody on the spot. I could look at what's wrong with the situation, or I could look at what's right, or what I'm willing to do. And also, it's been a way of challenging my thinking to see, okay, if something is painted in a certain light and it's just like, okay, this is accepted, things are bad. It's like, okay, so things are bad. Like, the sun goes down, the sun comes up, things are bad. Like, are you
It's
going to change, or are you just going to look at things are bad? It's like, come on.
you can't. The more you sit in a place where we assume that we don't have control in our own decision making, and we're not willing to bet on ourselves, the more that we're going to look at the world with scarcity,
Mm.
whether we're consciously aware of it or not. Um, so I created the Balanced Man plan after I got news of a sixth childhood friend that died from an overdose. Mentioned being a wild, high risk decision adolescent. And statistically, uh, you know, half of us don't make it, especially men. Just, doing stupid high risk stuff. Um, so when I got news of that happening, uh, it had been a while since someone that I knew and ran around with younger had died. And it was at a point that I was also realizing how much of an impact gender expectations have on the poor health of men and boys. And sitting there going like, gosh, like these folks also like knew what I do for a living. They know I'm a shrink, and they still didn't call me. And like they knew that I knew what it's like to be out there doing stupid stuff, and they still didn't call me. So I was like, all right, well, this is what I know how to do, is study this as in depth as I can and create a system and put it online. If Oskar Schindler had a factory and he leveraged that during the war when he could have been, you know, making more money selling shells and ammunition or whatever, I'm gonna spend all this time and energy and creating this bed of research and creating this curriculum that can be accessed super inexpensively by folks who are not willing to ask for help yet, and try to create a bridge in this place that is obviously broken and people are falling through, and that's what I could control. And started putting it together probably a year before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, it's kind of, as time goes on, I'm just like, more and more glad that I did that. And putting all that information together, ended up collecting enough stuff to start doing other stuff with, and wrote a book, and got really comfortable creating content on social media. And I was just like a TikTok account with almost 1 million followers, and I got really, and then started releasing or uploading more of that content to Instagram, and that account started to go nuts. Just like I was taking myself too seriously. I allowed myself to play a little bit more on TikTok, and it came out, and apparently it's more resonant. And it's like, shit, like just every time I think I've unlocked a new kind of part of how awesome it is to bet on yourself and develop faith in your own purpose over time, like it keeps getting better and better and cooler and cooler. And every decision continues to be about, I'm not getting too excited about it or getting attached to what it could be or should be, like know where I'm going. I don't exactly know what it's going to turn into, but I know what kind of vibe is going to be happening, and it'll, more value I create for people, and in the end, it'll come back.
It's amazing.
Thanks, man.
So what's the experience been like in creating a resource that you felt was needed, and also the feedback you receive from people that wouldn't normally accept help or go asking for it, for that matter?
And it's just really cool, building things that help people and solve problems. What's been the really cool thing for me, the feedback that I get, is that people that I know who are really brainy and lawyers and doctors and stuff will be like, hey, this was so pertinent, really like love these parts of it. Da, da, da. And similarly, people who are like blue collar, went through sophomore year of high school, still get through it. It's not, I spent a lot of energy making sure that it was digestible for anyone that can read a newspaper.
Yeah.
And hearing that feedback is the coolest part for me. And as well as that feedback from people from very different faith-based backgrounds, people who are like, very much identify as Christians, but other people are Muslim, gone through it. This is really cool and fits together with their theology. as well as folks who are atheists and
Mm.
Buddhist, thinking about a Gaia principle, and just as a human being,
Mm.
humans are supposed to be the liver of Gaia, and the more we purify ourselves and help be good shepherds for the rest of the system, the better chance we have of turning the health of the earth around as a planet. How is that not considered spiritual? I don't know, but
Yeah.
I would, at
Yeah.
least. I think it resonates with people from all different walks of life. That's what I'm most proud of.
That's amazing. I like that. You 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 were diligent in your approach to really make sure that what you communicated was understood, and just constantly working at just clarifying your message to make it straightforward, not to make it like, okay, here's who I am, but more so like, here's something that can serve you. And I think just kind of going back to what you said earlier about kind of taking away the ego, being part of that program where you see the interaction between young men and boys for that matter that will become men, and just seeing, being willing to deal with the hard times even when you don't think you can deal with it, and just kind of taking those things in and answering a call, but at the same time making sure you step back and you don't get caught up in the thing, because it could just be like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing, but it's like you have to kind of take your own medicine and say, okay, like where am I at? Like am I getting too sucked into this thing, or do I need to like take a break for a bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, how can people find you and just learn more about what it is that you do?
Sure. Thanks for that. You can go to, for now, balancedmanplan.com. It's a website that has all kinds of different stuff there. From, you can see, you can get copies of my book. Got it on Amazon. There's also like a free chapter on PDF. First go on there, you can check that out. I want you to get something that you don't know if you vibe with beforehand.
What's the book called again?
It's called How to Human Up in Modern Society, Heal Yourself and Save the World.
I like that.
Right. It's pointing out, it's kind of an intersection between psychology, anthropology, and spirituality to frame where humans have been up to this point, how and why we've gotten so lost in this dystopian concrete jungle, and how to find meaning and purpose within the context that we're given. And it also is from the framework of something that can serve as a bit of an unhealthy masculinity deconversion process, or really kind of break down a lot of these pieces and like how they relate back to old school hunter warrior stuff and really don't apply to who human beings are at our core anymore, since we're no longer in isolated farming communities. It's cool if you feel like a pit bull or a German shepherd. Most men are working dogs, as I would say. Like, we're all like fast twitch muscle beings. That's what we're here for to some degree. But all those breeds are dogs before they're breeds. And if those needs as animals are not met, we get obsessed with the breed and we can get unstable. But that's I would especially recommend that for, like in a space with like men's reading groups or stuff like that. It'd be super helpful. Or if a man in your life that you care about and wish he would like get certain things, a good gift to give as well. That's not like a what to give a stupid man 101 kind of title, which I think a lot of that like swing towards the toxic masculinity stuff tends to have a real tongue-in-cheek punchy thing that doesn't allow men to be at the table and actually encountering the information. It's not actually helpful. It's like the PETA people or the Save the Rainforest people 30 years ago. We can't engage people by chasing them with scary images. It just doesn't help.
Right.
There's also a very robust blog feed with a lot of blogs that I've created, tons of content, and those the curriculum of self-guided coaching plans is there as well. Combinations of content and instructional videos that guide folks through 9 areas of balance, there being 5 core and 4 support in this system. Let's see. And yeah, in the next few weeks, I'll be opening up a new website just at logancohen.com. As an author, I realized I needed to do that. So that's happening.
Awesome.
Of course, as well as on socials, with Balanced Man Plan, or on TikTok as Healing Humanity 777.
I like it. And one last question I have for you is, are you still who you said you were?
Oh, hell yeah. That's how I sleep.
I love it. It's funny. I thought of an extra question as you were talking about your book, and I was going to ask if you've heard of, or if you're familiar with the No More Mr. Nice Guy book.
No.
It's an interesting book that a friend gave me last year, and I guess it kind of speaks to tendencies of people that could be termed quote unquote nice, and really it goes into a bit of psychology, explaining the difference between someone being nice to get something versus like being true to themselves and being honest about what their intentions are, and not doing so not to just avoid avoid abandonment, or like really detaching from old modes of thinking, in the way of like, okay, you did this coping mechanism as a child, like hiding things to seem like okay, like every time you do something wrong, it's just like, oh, I'm just going to hide this away. Like if it's hidden, it's not known, it's not it's not considered, it's not anything to think about. And it is an interesting book where I'm like, man, I got to go back and revisit it, because like that book, Boundaries, and potentially your book, it's these other books, they have like, you read a chapter and it's like, okay, here's an activity that you need to go do. And one of the first things was like, you need to go plan a trip for yourself, by yourself. And that was like the first time I remember reading that, I was just kind of like, ooh. I was just such in a space of just stuck, where I'm like, wait, what do you mean I'm gonna go do something for me? Like,
and that's something that about the book that I was just talking about as well. It just showed you at the end of each chapter, there are a series of exercises to go through and uncover stuff. And the piece that I've heard back from all the fellows who have gotten it as well, from totally different walks of life, some that are like environmental lawyers and some that work on cars.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, Logan, why you got to write a book about me, man? Especially like deconstructing the masculinization processes and what those things mean, how they play out socially, how they hurt us and help us.
Yeah.
There are just certain things. Men are really in need of a software update right now.
Yeah.
We have a ton of social and cultural and economic influence available to us. If we can shift from power and control and emotional restriction to servant leadership and emotional attunement, man, we can save the world in one generation. And it's got to be us.
That's so true. I think I might take you up on the idea of the book club, because someone had mentioned it to me before for the podcast, and I was like, I don't know how that would work, but I guess the best thing to do is just try and see it. And I guess I'd start with myself, go through it, and then learn what I can learn, and either try to attract people or just develop myself and just keep going down that track.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. Even if you wrote a blog for each one, and how helped or what the critiques for it or whatever. Like how many dudes are doing that? That'd be cool.
That'd be cool. Well, I appreciate the time, man.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to meet you and cut it up with a little bit with you here. Stay cool down there.
I will.
All right.
Be
Take it easy.
safe. Bye.